Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the panel discussion on cemeteries as cultural landscapes. My name is Faith Kuehn, and I will be the moderator for this session. We'll take questions at the end of the presentations, and all the attendees are muted. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you would like to ask a question, and the chat function is available as well. This presentation is being recorded and will be available in a few weeks on the Preservation Delaware's YouTube channel. And finally, we'd like to thank all the sponsors that have made this meeting possible. Thank you very much. That's quite a collection of them. And if you aren't already a member of PDI, today would be a great day to join or donate. And your support really helps to keep events like this one free. So there'll be more information on that in the chat. And so to kick it off, I'm going to share my screen with just a little introduction here. Okay, a cultural landscape is a historically significant place. It's a combination of a natural landscape and a human-mediated design. It can be a grand estate, an industrial site, a park, or a cemetery. Collectively, cultural landscapes are works of art, narratives of the culture. They tell our story. The cemeteries, there we go. The cemeteries represented in this slide tell part of Delaware's story. From left to right, the African Union Church Cemetery in Folktown, the Union Cemetery in Smyrna, and Charles Terry, the Buffalo Soldier, the Spiral Cemetery, and the Wilmington and Brandywine Cemetery on the right. Today, we'll consider 5 cemeteries or burial grounds, and I really appreciate the people who have agreed to talk about them and their works to restore them. There are no grand statues or soaring arches in these places. They were all but forgotten over time. Fortunately, people's work of piecing together their history and renovating their grounds is restoring their place in Delaware's history. They tell stories of our people and the times in which they lived. These cemeteries are a legacy for Delaware. Protecting them is protecting our shared heritage. So I'd like to begin with Regina Berry. I'll quickly introduce Regina. You can read a lot more about her in the presenter bios. She's been doing genealogy for more than 40 years. She's a volunteer librarian at the Wilmington Family History Center. She's lectured at regional genealogical conferences and has published several articles. Her areas of special interest are early Southern colonial court records, African-American genealogical research, and genealogy for the timid, tense, and terrified. Thank you very much, Regina, and please take it away.
Hi, I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm going to switch to sharing my screen, and you should be able to see my presentation in just a moment. Can we see?
Looks good.
Thank you very much. I started this by speaking about the buried cemeteries of Wilmington, because as I worked on this, I realized just how many cemeteries we walk over every day. And I should have known that because I've looked for cemeteries that no longer existed and said, oh, they're not there. But this really brought it home as I went through this work. I started this because a gentleman stopped in at the Family History Library one day and said that he had heard that the Family History Libraries had interesting records, many records, and he was interested to know if they had a list of people buried at Mount Olive Cemetery, because he was the caretaker and he wanted to put together a Memorial Day service. And at that time, I said one of the more foolish things I've ever said in my life. I drive by it every day on my way to work, and I can make a list. That was in 2011. I am still working on this list, and I'll include during this talk many of the resources I have used to begin to build this list. And the first thing I found when I went back looking at records to find out where cemeteries were in Wilmington, in 1861, the city council passed a resolution that the African Union Church could no longer use their burial ground. It shall not be lawful to inter or bury any dead body in the ground heretofore used and now occupied by the African Union Church as a burial place in the rear of their meeting house on the easterly side of King Street above 8th in the city of Wilmington. And then there was a fine if the church used its burial ground. I went to look for a map that would potentially show burial grounds close to that time period. I found the 1868 Delaware Hundreds Atlas, the Beers Atlas, and it looks like on the very edge of the city, Front and Union, there are some little dots that are labeled AFF Cemetery. It would have been Front and Union at that time. We now call it Lancaster and Union, but it's just outside the city line. And that becomes important. There are many moved cemeteries. And I found this out by looking back through records to find out who was buried in Mount Olive. I said I would make a list, and I found there are many cemeteries that have been moved. I couldn't find anything that was recorded as being in the African cemeteries out on Front Street. There are burial records available online from that time period. If they indicate a burial location, they often just say colored cemetery, or they don't even indicate a location. But between 1862 and later, you start seeing the names of cemeteries in the death records. The death records I'm using are on familysearch.org. They're free. Anyone can get to it. And they're not indexed by burial ground. So you have to look at them page by page. This has a lot to do with why I've been working on this since 2011. There's St. Peter's. That was one of the ones at Front Union, and it's one shown on, one of the ones we think is shown on that little map. It was used 1861. They found definitive records of burials there to about 1914, and it's under the car dealerships. There's Ezion, which was between 2nd and 3rd and Union, and it was moved to the present Mount Zion, most of the burials. Union and New Union, Front and 3rd on Union, because the cemetery names keep changing with time. They were moved to Mount Olive. St. Peter's was moved to Mount Olive. African Union on French Street, that's under Peter Spencer Plaza. There's another African Union cemetery, 12th and French, under the former MBNA building. And I'll talk a little bit about what they found when they went to put the MBNA building in. Old Union, 12th and French, former MBNA building. And then Mount Olive, active 1899 through the mid-1980s. And I'm still working on identifying all the burials using newspaper articles, death records, family members contacting me, actual markers, burial permits at the Delaware Historic Society. Just a wide variety of records you have to pull together to make a list of who's there. And here's a newspaper article from 1909. People were making a cellar at 2nd and Tatnall, and they found a bunch of bodies. One old person in the area said that it might have been an old colored cemetery. I've never seen a reference to anyone being buried there, but they found bodies, so someone was. When I went through the current Mount Olive, there is a 1939 WPA sketch with a list of burials at the Delaware Historic Society. And I wanted to see if I could identify the landmarks that are shown in that 1939 sketch with current landmarks on the ground. And I was able to find quite a few. The red lines on my map indicate the old roads shown in that 1939 sketch. The photographs on the left-hand side is where I was able to match up concrete ribs, the end of the road, a corner, all small traces that I found walking around the site that match up with the old landmark. And there's a number of different numbering schemes, burial schemes, plots. It seems to have been renumbered and relaid out any number of times. In 2021, however, we were able to get a marker working with the family for a USCT soldier, Private Almarine Bush. He was from Indiana. He served in the Rhode Island Heavy Cavalry. And I was contacted because I created a website to put all these records on by a friend of the family member who was trying to help her friend with genealogy. And so we gathered together the records, submitted them all to the VA, got the marker, and Mr. Pauley of Pauley Monuments on Lancaster Avenue put it in for us free of charge out of respect for the veteran. It's a lovely marker, and we had a special memorial for him this last Memorial Day. This is what you see when you look at the death records on Family Search. And there are various names referring to all these cemeteries. And sometimes they give you an address, and sometimes they give you a location. Sometimes they give you different names for the exact same cemetery. And sometimes you have to piece it together by looking where the family members were buried at the time. And again, it's not indexed. You need to look at every page. I love maps. Maps are the best thing ever for research. So I found an 1895 map of Wilmington, Delaware, Kaufman's map, and it's in the New York Public Library online collection. And I said, well, these cemeteries were active. Union was active, St. Peter's was active, Old Union was active, Ezion was active. They were all active. I see burials at that time in all of them. They're even in the city directories. They give their addresses, they mention they're active. If you look on the map, they're not shown. And this was a consistent problem that I had with identifying where these cemeteries could be. Catholic cemeteries there, Brandywine cemeteries there, the old Catholic cemeteries there, but I don't see Old Union. I don't see the Spencer Burying Ground. I don't see St. Peter's and St. Ezion. I tried sketching them on the map. I mean, you can even match it up with the description from the Wilmington City Directory. There it is in the directory, but it's not on the map. So what did I find in the records? 1861 was the earliest death record I found that showed a burial at St. Peter's, and that's Mrs. Rachel Holm. Carolyn Trusty, whose marker is shown in the bottom left of the screen, is the earliest existing marker that was moved from St. Peter's to Mount Olive that I could positively identify. And there are a number of other people buried who were originally at St. Peter's, Front and Union, who were moved to Mount Olive. The earliest burials at Mount Olive, I think, is Daniel Hamilton. He seems to be the earliest one I've been able to document. He was 1900. Number of the children of the Loper family are buried there. There was ongoing burials from 1900 on, but they're still active at St. Peter's. And in 1906, they were moving the city line, Bancroft Parkway, a lot of development, and there was interest in moving the old cemeteries that had been just outside the city line. So they start having complaints about Board of Health, saying the cemeteries are not well maintained, saying that they're full, and I would believe they are full. at that point. They had been burying there for 50 or 60 years. And there was a discussion about making the area into a park. Transcript from the newspaper. And it shows you the two different cemeteries that were side by side. The St. Peter's Cemetery and the Mount Zion Cemetery, which you'll only see in the records as Ezion Cemetery. You will not see it called Mount Zion in the burial records. And they decided, well, we're going to come up with a way to move all this. So there was much discussion, much dispute in the city council. And finally, in 1914, there was a decision reached to move St. Peter's. Ezion moved later. The bid to move everyone came in 1914 from William Campbell, to be done in 4 months. Now, the interesting part about that is when they began to move the coffins, the markers, everything they could move, and I can believe that they wouldn't be able to move everything because some people were buried without coffins. Many people are buried without markers. For any given cemetery, there's usually one marker for an old cemetery for about 15 burials. So lots of people are not identified. I've currently identified about 13,000 people who would have been in St. Peter's and Mount Olive and then moved there over time. There's only 900 stones. So most graves aren't marked. And I can believe they couldn't get everyone moved. In addition, the first people who were moved, some of the oldest members of the cemetery, they were placed the wrong way in Mount Olive. Burials are placed facing east, traditionally, at least in the United States. When they moved to the first 100 stones or so from St. Peter's to Mount Olive, they placed them in the back corner facing Lancaster Avenue, which is not facing east. After they filled in that first corner, someone realized they were not being placed in the right direction. So the stones that were moved after that point from St. Peter's are placed correctly. Carolyn Trusty's stone faces east. She was one of the ones who was moved a little bit later in the move process. Apparently it was completely done within the 4 months. I haven't been able to find anything that was the final move, but Ezion Cemetery didn't stay there either. That one was moved partially to Mount Zion, as far as I've been able to identify with the records, and partially to Summit Bridge. Mount Olive continued active until the early 1980s. That's the latest burial that I've been able to find between 1980 and 1985. A lot of those don't have stones. They have metal markers, but that was pretty much when it stopped being used. However, the old Union Cemetery, those graves were supposedly moved. Many of them ended up in Mount Olive. I can see the stones. But they discovered that not all of them were moved. Just like from St. Peter's, it's very hard to get everything out of a cemetery. So in 1996, when they started to build the MBNA building, they found a lot of graves. And this is in the News Journal. And the public notice indicates the people they were able to identify from headstones, from coffin plates and other information. And they were reinterred at Summit Bridge. A number of the families of the people that they found are at Mount Olive, probably formerly at St. Peter's or formerly at Old Union. So you really have to look among a variety of cemetery records to get an entire family. Records? Well, if you've got an active cemetery, you've got caretaker records, burial plot records, records of lot purchases. Mount Olive? I had identified 1972. I think we just identified one as 1981. And according to the WPA, there was a caretaker's house on site and records. I spoke to a gentleman who remembered going there for his aunt's funeral when he was a little boy, and there was still a caretaker's house and there were still records. But that's gone. The only list before I began compiling it was the 1939 WPA transcript. It was 434 gravestones. They have no records of the unmarked burials. You have to use the death records to get that. There's no real locations. There's just some lines and numbers. And I think I'm going to be very generous and say never criticize the starting point, because they did identify 434 gravestones. And the amount of deterioration in the stones between 1939 and now made that transcript very valuable for being able to read some of the dates and some of the inscriptions on the stones. But we have GPS now. When I went through the cemetery, I used GPS on all of the stones I could find and the numeric markers. And what did I use? I have the actual markers, I have the transcript, death certificates, transit permits, newspaper obituaries, burial permits, out-of-state death certificates, and human intelligence. A number of people walked me to places where their aunt or their grandfather was buried and told me they were there. Cemetery care is a constant need. There have been many efforts over the years to keep Mount Olive in good shape, to keep Mount Zion in good shape. It's always difficult. Cemeteries are very active, even when they're not being used. And the thank yous here, I cannot thank enough people, enough times. I'm just the guy who put the list together. There are heavy lifting and credits going to Bill Jones, Ralph Woody, Frankie Lee, caretakers at various points, Reverend Livingston, Reverend Lee, Reverend Whitaker, Mother African Union, Matt Myers and his staff, Brian, a friend in Minnesota, and all the other wonderful people who've helped. Priscilla Turgeon with Project New Start, John Pauley, many, many volunteers. And that's the website that I've got all this on. You can find it just by looking for Mount Olive Cemetery. But that's pretty much it for me.
Regina, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I've been taking down some questions, and we will wait till the end. To keep on track, we're going to queue up the next speaker.
Okay.
And but thank you very much, Regina. Okay, our next speaker is Gloria Henry. She is the site supervisor of the John Dickinson Plantation, a National Historic Landmark and the unit of the First State National Memorial Park. She spent the last 31 years conducting historic demonstrations portraying enslaved individuals, transcribing primary documents, conducting tours, and creating exhibits. She's currently the vice president of the Underground Railroad Coalition of Delaware, and she's passionate about sharing Delaware history. So, Gloria, will you share your screen and take it away?
Hello, my name is Gloria Henry, and I am the site supervisor of the John Dickinson Plantation, an historic site that is administered by the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs. It is also a National Historic Landmark and a unit of the First State National Historical Park. The plantation was the boyhood home of John Dickinson, one of our founding fathers. He was a governor of Delaware and Pennsylvania, and he was a framer and signer of the US Constitution. John Dickinson was known as the penman of the Revolution, and he helped create this nation and wrote of freedom and liberty for all while holding human beings in bondage. Most importantly, the John Dickinson Plantation was home to a variety of people. We strive to share the stories of the Dickinson family, the tenant farmers, the indentured servants, the freedom seekers, and the free and enslaved Black men, women, and children that lived, labored, and died on the plantation. The plantation is located south of Dover, along the St. John's River, And today the plantation consists of approximately 450 acres. We have an historic mansion, a visitor center, 6 reconstructed outbuildings, and 2 gardens. We also have 2 burial grounds, one for Samuel Dickinson, John Dickinson's father, and the African burial ground, which was discovered on March 9th, 2021. Our future projects include the creation of pathways and trails to the St. John's River Landing and the St. John's Research Reserve. An area of reflection is also planned for the public and the staff because of the difficult narratives we share with the public.
Hey, Gloria, just really quick. I'm wondering, because I can see like your notes, I'm wondering if there's a way to make your presentation full screen.
Yes, hold on. Is that better?
Let's see, so it's looking, oh, there we go, perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
That's all right. In 2020, the Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs published a race and equity statement. We stated that we would be a safe place for difficult conversations and uncomfortable truths. Our history includes stories of pain, courage, and defeat, and we will not shrink from the pain of our shared history. The belief and support of the race and equity statement that led to our initiative of ending erasure and recognizing African Americans in the cultural landscape. This initiative ensures that we share the multiple stories and perspectives of the men, women, and children who lived, labored, and died on the plantation. The Historical and Cultural Affairs staff has always been involved in the research of the free and enslaved and indentured servants associated with the plantation. And based on the documentation and records, we knew that there was an African burial ground somewhere on the property, but we were determined to find it. Most importantly, we knew that the discovery of the African burial ground would change the interpretation of the John Dickinson plantation forever. We were also aware that with the discovery of the African burial ground, we would have difficult decisions to make and that we couldn't and wouldn't make those decisions alone. The most compelling historical record about the people and the burial ground comes from a woman named Violet Brown. Violet Brown was born an enslaved woman who was owned by the Dickinson family. She was eventually manumitted or freed unconditionally in 1786 and continued to work for the Dickinson family, taking care of John Dickinson's children. Her conversations, which were recalled and written down by Sally Dickinson, John's daughter, provided information on some of the events that occurred at the plantation. Violet recollected the death of her father, Pompey, which occurred before 1760, and she stated that there had been a funeral for him and that it had passed by the mansion house to the grounds allotted to the internment of the enslaved individuals. With those words, we knew there was a burial ground on the property. We found multiple references to death in a graveyard, including purchasing and making coffins, such as providing a coffin for old Toby's daughter in 1806. Digging ditches and banks around a graveyard by enslaved individuals Daniel and Shadrach, and building a post and rail fence around a graveyard. Other documents mention the death of a particular enslaved or free person. One reference stated that in 1772, John Dickinson purchased Nanny, an enslaved woman, and her 4 children, Nell, Violet, Rose, and Daniel. They have been owned and sold by the Dickinson family. John Dickinson wrote on her bill of sale that Nanny and Daniel had died, and the 3 other children were separated and sent to different tenant farmers. We can assume that Nanny and Daniel were buried in the African burial ground. The field work conducted in our search for the burial ground included ground penetrating radar, shovel testing, metal detecting, chemical soil sampling, and excavation. Trenches were dug, and on March the 9th, 2021, the archaeologists informed us that they had found the burial ground. So what did we discover? We discovered that the site containing the African burial ground was acquired by the state in the year 2000. The size of the burial ground is 170 feet by 160 feet, which is under an acre. We found almost 30 grave shafts, post holes, burnt tree roots, and unknown anomalies. The grave shafts were oriented from east to west, and some nail fragments were identified, which may indicate the use of coffins. No human remains were disturbed, and we did not uncover the entire burial ground. Oral histories state that the number of graves is 400. Some of the soil disturbances may be the graves of children. This slide shows the process of closing the burial ground. The archaeologists identified each feature and covered each grave shaft with geotech fabric and to protect them. Then they filled in the trenches. We have identified, excuse me, we have identified 3 grave shafts for possible investigation in the future. There's a lot we don't know, such as exactly who was buried there. When did they begin burying people in that location? When did they stop burying people in that location? Was it a community burial ground? How many people were buried there exactly? We may never know the answers to these questions. And now that we have found the burial ground, what's next? How do we share it with the public? How do we ask the public and the descendant communities to engage with us? How do we protect the burial ground location from climate change? We are now providing African burial ground visitations. We are asking the public to share information with us and to help us make future decisions regarding the burial ground. The visitations include a PowerPoint presentation where we share the history of the plantation and explain some of the terminology. Then we take a walk to the log dwelling, which is a recreated log building that reflects how working families who were Black or white, free or enslaved lived. We discuss some of the people who were buried there, and then we walk to the burial ground. Once there, we have a moment of silence, and we walk around the perimeter. We ask visitors to complete evaluations on the program and offer any suggestions and thoughts about the burial ground. The Plantation Stories Project, which is an online database, is a listing of the names of the people who are connected with the John Dickinson Plantation. The information is based on our research on Black men, women, and children, and who are associated with the site. This database is based on manumission documents, ledgers, lease agreements, indentured servant contracts, runaway ads, census records, and inventories. The Plantation Stories Project is a part of our initiative of ending erasure. This project utilizes primary source materials to find the names of the African Americans and to compile them into a searchable database. As more information is processed, the database will be updated, and we are mindful of the bias contained within the documents. They were mostly written by the Dickinsons and other white males of a certain privilege and educated class. We don't always have sources written or provided by the people discussed in the documents. We may never know all we can about the people who lived and labored on the plantation, but we are trying to share the information we do have with the public. We are currently working on a website for the Plantation Stories Project with the help of the Delaware Government Information Center. We are looking for the descendant communities of the men, women, and children associated with the plantation and the St. John's Neck area. During John's ownership, the plantation was almost 5,000 acres. He owned much of the land that was Kittummon. The division received grant funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation's Jordan Fund to hire a consultant and using the Engaging Descendant Communities rubric to conduct staff training and public meeting facilitation. The Engaging Descendant Communities rubric is helping to guide us. One of the most important concepts of the rubric was the definition of descendant communities. That the descendant community was not only a group of people whose ancestors were enslaved at a particular site, it expanded that definition to include anyone with an interest in that historic site. Anyone in the community, in the area, in the region, in the world. The rubric encourages organizations to take an objective look at the site and helps identify and concentrate on areas for improvement. We want people to engage with us. We're asking them to share information with us to help us make future decisions. The choices and decisions that we need to make are complex and emotional. HCA's race and equity statement, we stated that we are listening and that we need the public's help. We will not make these decisions without the community's involvement. If we are going to ask the community to share their histories with us, we must be willing to share our information with them. So we share the stories of Peter Patton and John Furby, who were two free Black brothers who lived and worked in St. John's Neck and eventually became tenant farmers, leasing the land from John Dickinson. The house that John Furby lived in is called Kingston upon Hall, and it is still standing today. Dinah, an enslaved woman, and her family who were owned by the Dickinson family. We share the story of her eventual freedom and marriage to Peter Patton. Stories of freedom seekers, such as Clem and the 1790 reward notice placed in the Delaware Gazette. We share the stories about Nathan Phillips and how his wife Abigail and children were purchased by John Dickinson and eventually indentured to John. Their stories of tragedy and survival and family are our stories. And these stories can be difficult to share. The John Dickinson Plantation received funding from the National Trust for Historic Preservation Fund. It was to support a design creation for an area of reflection. This will be a safe area for the public and staff to reflect on the information that is shared on our site. University of Delaware landscape architect students under Dr. Anna Wick created designs for the area of reflection as part of their senior 2021 capstone project. The designs of the area of reflection were impressive, varied. The students visited the site and the African burial ground. The design selected for further development, which was created by Olivia Boone, included elements used to memorialize the enslaved people. This included naming individuals and encouraging reflection on slavery through a safe space. By orienting the area of reflection with a direct line of sight to the burial ground, it holistically provides a connection between the two. The design acknowledges the system of slavery through a symbolic form and encourages healing through a space to gather. The Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs provided matching funds for the grant. The area of reflection is intended to end the erasure of African Americans and Native Americans in the cultural landscape. The site will be utilizing recommendations of native plantings from the Lenape tribe of Delaware. So the work on the African burial ground, the Plantation Stories Project, and the area of reflection may be challenging and daunting and at times frustrating and definitely rewarding. But in the end, isn't the goal of ending erasure and recognizing African Americans and Native Americans in the cultural landscape worth it? We think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. That was a very moving presentation and really wonderful work. one very quick question that came up. On the plantation grounds, is there any indication that it was used by Native Americans?
We do know that we are in the process of doing more archaeology, so we have a more understanding, but on the grounds, yes, there were Native Americans using that land.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Now we're going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about two cemeteries that are on the grounds of the DHSS Herman Holloway campus in Newcastle. I will give just the brief introduction, and then Michael Kalmbach will start with the presentation on the Spiral Cemetery. Just a second, please. So I can share screen. Let me do this. Let me just give a brief introduction and then turn it over to Michael. The Delaware State Hospital Spiral Cemetery has about 776 people buried there between 1891 and 1983. These are primarily patients at the Delaware State Hospital. It is a potter's field, meaning that it was a burial ground used for people who did not have family that claimed them or means for burial expenses. It's in a circular pattern, which is similar to some post-Civil War cemeteries. And a restoration project was underway for the cemetery from 2010 to 2016. And there was a dedication of a monument listing the marker numbers and names of people buried there, and also a historic marker dedication in May of 2016. And I would like to read a quote to you from the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. We believe that forgotten and neglected graves of those who died in state institutions conveys a message of devaluing the people who struggled with mental illness, contributes to the burden of stigma that people still face today, and perpetuates the old image of the state hospital as a dehumanizing institution. Anthropologist and historian Kathy Detweiler wrote a report on the efforts at state and federal levels to restore abandoned and neglected cemeteries for mental hospitals and other state institutions. The Friends of the Spiral Cemetery, a group of state employees and mental health advocates, used Dr. Detweiler's report recommendations to develop a plan for the Spiral Cemetery renovation. One of our first considerations was HIPAA. Research and comparison work from other states concluded that listing names of those buried and their marker numbers was not a violation of HIPAA, especially after more than 50 years. The Friends decided on a monument with grave marker numbers and names. Among the other aspects of the group's plan was to acknowledge the veterans that were buried there, Civil War veterans and Spanish-American War veterans. Several of the lives and stories remain as marker numbers in the Spiral Cemetery. Farnhurst is usually thought of as having simply been a mental hospital. In reality, the institution cared for people with many different conditions, including traumatic and acquired brain injuries, syphilis, epilepsy, deafness, blindness, age-related senility, pregnancy-related conditions, and substance abuse disorders. All this at a time when there were few or no other options for care and treatment. Located in downtown Wilmington, the Creative Vision Factory provides individuals on the behavioral health spectrum, opportunities for self-expression, empowerment, and recovery through the arts. Michael Kalmbach was a member of the Friends of the Spiral Cemetery and executive director of Creative Vision Factory, was tasked with designing and building the monument and the monument roster with a list of names and marker numbers. So Michael will tell his story. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Faith. Unfortunately, without Faith's PowerPoint going up, you will not be able to see an image of the original monument that we created on the grounds of the Spiral Cemetery. The images that you're going to see right now are images of the reconstructed monument that we dedicated last fall. Like Faith said, the Creative Vision Factory is one of several peer-run programs throughout the state that actually were instituted as a direct result of a Department of Justice lawsuit against the Delaware Psychiatric Center back in 2011, or maybe even 2010. The Creative Vision Factory is now in our 11th year. Everybody who's on our staff has lived experience of substance abuse recovery and or a mental health diagnosis. And our studio space kind of creates a safe space for people to connect the resources, connect to friendships, connect to meaning and purpose. Executing and working on this monument was really meaningful for a variety of reasons. Thanks to, listening to Gloria's talking about the importance of ending erasure. The Spiral Cemetery stones only ever having numbers on them for generations really tells you a lot of what we thought about those lives. Those stories, perhaps would never be told, and not being able to connect those numbers to names. Really, we felt like early on in our program, coming out of the settlement agreement, that it was a classic example of the type of reform and change that was desperately needed in these institutions. And so the images you're seeing right now, those are the hands of our ceramic artist, Joe Netta, who is imprinting flowers and plants onto clay tiles while the clay is still wet. And early on in the pandemic, the Creative Vision Factory was engaged in a full-on push to try to get our unhoused friends into emergency shelters. And so a lot of our community integration and community arts programming really, took a back burner while we were responding to the crisis of the immediate needs of individuals who were outside, locked out during the state shutdown orders. And so these tiles that you see right here being painted, these are being painted by folks who are living at the Newcastle County Hope Center. In March of 2020, shortly after the shutdown, we always knew about half of our membership was experiencing homelessness. To be able to see those people gather in front of our building on the other side of our glass doors, looking for answers, looking for information, looking for where they could go when they saw their entire supportive infrastructure shut down. When you're on the streets experiencing homelessness and you cannot utilize the Wilmington Library, when you cannot use coffee shop lobbies, when all of that social infrastructure is closed to you, the Creative Vision Factory immediately started to survey individuals and advocate for temporary hotel stays. And so for us, the opening of the Newcastle County Hope Center was just, it was necessary, it was needed. We're forever grateful to Matt Meyer and his team and the leadership there. Carrie Casey, who's pictured here on the left, was also part of these workshops. One of the challenges that we had working collaboratively at the peak of the pandemic was that we didn't have enough space to actually work with lots of people in close quarters. The benefit of having an emergency shelter in a very large, underutilized hotel off of 95 is that they had very large banquet halls and spaces where we're actually able to do our workshops with people who are the initial tenants of the Hope Center. And so here's Carrie Casey, the general manager of the Hope Center at the time, and my daughter, who was able to take her classes at on Zoom at the Hope Center, along with some children who were living at the Hope Center, and was also my assistant on several of these workshops. But these clay tiles, once fired, when we imprint the plants and flowers onto the wet clay, applying the glaze is much like an exercise in just watercolor. And so just putting the pigments down, the water kind of seeks and goes through the imprint onto the clay. And it's a really, kind of a slow paced, really almost impossible to paint one of these and not be mindful. And, over the years, Creative Vision Factory is in our 11th year, and we often talk about the importance of creativity and making art together is really to kind of be together in community, to learn new skills. But one of the things that we've observed over the years is that so many of our members are experiencing such hardships, consistent, complex, post-traumatic stress is very much alive and well with everybody who comes through our doors, anybody who is in emergency shelter. The lawsuit against the state hospital also corresponds with a movement in the field of trauma-informed care. And if an institution is genuinely trauma-informed, everyone from the boss to people working in the kitchen to security, everybody in that community would stop asking, what's wrong with you? And would start to ask, what happened to you? What's been interesting for us in our work at the Creative Vision Factory is I think we also need to extend that kind of trauma-informed lens on specific spaces and places. Oftentimes we hear, what is wrong with Wilmington rather than what happened to Wilmington. What is wrong with the Delaware State Hospital or this ground or this cemetery rather than what happened there. And so these floral tiles in our newly designed monument are flanking these directory tiles. And like I said, we've had several project failures on this job. Our initial monument that we dedicated back in 2016, the original tiles that we made actually failed. We came to find out that they were fired with the wrong clay body at the wrong temperature. And after the very first winter, the tiles that we made in workshop settings at the Delaware Psychiatric Center's art therapy room started to flake and erode. And so many years had to pass before we could actually get back to the site to address it. And this is an example of the directory tiles in our studio where we had to chisel off a bunch of concrete and grout off the tiles, getting it ready for the newly designed monument. And so the newly designed monument that we dedicated last fall, some of the pictures are here, little details. We love this poem that was written by one of the original tenants of the Newcastle County Hope Center. It says here, planted are the lives that have needlessly suffered at our hands of administration. Let us allow the souls of our remembered losses be the forever growth to the flowers of our needed positive change within ourselves and to all others around us. For not one body, mind, and or soul needs to continue suffering at our expense. Let the flowers grow. And so within the peer recovery movement, there's many activists who organized based off of their experience in state hospitals, in various healthcare facilities. One of these champions, Darby Penny, is a former mental health worker and human rights activist working for improvements in psychiatric care. Darby actually died in the weeks ahead of our dedication last year on October 11th, 2021. One of Darby's most famous projects is this book and exhibition project called The Lives They Left Behind, Suitcases from a State Hospital Attic. She mounted this exhibition on suitcases that were in the attic of Willard Psychiatric Center in upstate New York. And looking at the contents of these suitcases and trying to piece together the lives that these people led before they went into the hospital, before their histories and their stories were erased in unmarked graves. this is something that is not unique to Willard Psychiatric Center. This is something that is common with, psychiatric centers and these cemeteries across the country. And so kind of on the shoulders and the legacy of the peer support and work of Darby Penny and the DOJ settlement here in Delaware, peer support specialists were being trained. Peer-run centers are opened up in every single county with the express goal of getting people the services they need in their communities. And so, working in the field, advocating for people whose experience navigating the system is still filled with a variety of harms. Just because the settlement agreement kind of stopped us from warehousing people at the state hospital doesn't necessarily mean that we have the supports in the community. And so the Creative Vision Factory and the other peer centers throughout the state are often working with individuals, advocating for them, supporting them in their experience. And, the work of being able to kind of, dedicate these lives, tell these stories is really, advocating for the dead at the state hospital. We're still very much advocating for our friends who are very much still navigating these systems. And so here's two views of the monument. Now, this monument, though, like I said, this is the second iteration, and unfortunately, last February, we had Faith and I had the horrific experience of coming up on this wall and seeing that the last iteration of the monument, we had a failure of the tile, and this go round we had an adhesive failure. And when we discovered that these tiles started to crack and fell down, it was, to tell you the truth, I felt like I experienced a death all over again. And so we yet again spent this past year cleaning up the monument, cleaning up the tiles. We had to remake a lot of the corner tile and some of the floral tile. And we have now, just about when we were getting ready to rebuild it for a third time this winter, we were heavily encouraged to punt this install to the spring for the new adhesive that we're going to be using. Should not be used in ambient temperatures at 50 degrees or below, and that season is already upon us. So we are gathering materials and getting ready for the third iteration of the DPC Spiral Cemetery Monument, which will be installed this spring. And going through this experience and having this project fail for the second time, truth be told, this filled me with a tremendous amount of shame. And being on the ground, being with the souls of that cemetery, having chiseled those directory tiles not once but twice, you get to know these names. And I definitely felt like I personally here I am letting these souls down yet again. And the work and the support of friends and the community that we've been a part of with this project really helped me see that the great thing about our peer support and bringing the arts into that peer community is that we'll simply try again, and we'll simply bring this kind of craftsman lens to this project and learn from the experience. And really, it's been our experience over 11 years of doing the work and peer support in the arts here in Wilmington, that this kind of craftsman mentality is something that's very much needed in our community supports, that we don't always have the right tools. We're not always properly resourced. We don't often have even the appropriate analysis. And so a willingness to keep trying again is really important. And we're really looking forward to this spring's install. Here we are, there's Faith and me and also Ashley Biden over at the Farnhurst Cemetery side. And so the Farnhurst Cemetery side on the state hospital grounds, 85% of the Farnhurst Cemetery is actually buried underneath the I-295 embankment here. This little drawing and sketch to the right is a little drawing I did of a proposed tunnel mosaic project that we're considering. This tunnel right here is part of the Jack Markell Bike Trail. It was constructed in 2017. And if you're inside that tunnel, about 100 or so yards to the east lies the Farnhurst Cemetery. And so we're envisioning a project where one side of the tunnel would commemorate the lives buried in Farnhurst, and the other side of the tunnel would commemorate the ecological impacts of the highway construction through Delaware. Also doing some research on the Chesapeake Bay Authority and Pennsylvania Turnpike tunnels. We've also come across the adhesive that we would need to ensure that tiles would stay on this wall in particular. But the tunnel, and thinking about the Farnhurst Cemetery, it was a really powerful metaphor for us as we were serving individuals through this pandemic. I often tell people that our population was experiencing a crisis before the crisis hit. And that was a crisis of the paltry quality of care for individuals who were on Social Security disability insurance, and the lack of supports and affordable housing that are really out in the community to really promote wellness. And so we're envisioning a future where not only these souls at Farnhurst are commemorated and individuals are learning new skills, building community, and finding purpose in a project of this scale, but also thinking about, what happens, what is the light on the other side of the tunnel? The tunnel project really feels like, really feels like a portal. What our community supports and what would mental health look like if we were able to center the needs of those individuals who are buried under Farnhurst? What happens if we can center the needs of the individuals who found themselves displaced out after the pandemic and living in hotels? Some people still out in the streets. And so, like I said, we'll be back there this spring to install with a really significantly stronger adhesive. And this winter too, at the Creative Vision Factory, every first Friday of the month, we're going to be holding open houses at our location at 6th and Shipley Street in downtown Wilmington. And if you'd like to come in and see some of these tiles, like I said, we're going to be doing the install as soon as the temperatures warm up in the spring. But we have a lot of the floral tile, a lot of the directory tile in studio. We're going to be making more corner tiles throughout the winter, and we invite everybody to come actually see our location. Any first Friday of the month from 5:30 to 8:30, we'll be conducting those open houses. So I will turn it back over to Faith. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Resilience is a very important part of this whole process, and it's really amazing, Michael's resilience through the whole, and determination to ensure that this monument is built and the people buried there are properly remembered. And I think Michael's presentation underscored something that the other speakers have mentioned, that these cemeteries, they're not just for the dead, they're for the living as well. And they have many connections between those who are buried there and our lives today, and what we need to do to keep moving forward. So I will now share my screen. Okay. This is a quote from Delmarva Star, March 19th, 1933. Half hidden behind the sloping ground in the rear of the Newcastle County Hospital lies Potter's Field, final haven for the friendless, the unknown, the derelict. Flotsam and jetsam, human driftwood on the sea of life. Here they rest at last, crowded closely together in a tiny area, as if even in death, the living begrudge room for the unfortunate. The Newcastle County Almshouse and Hospital served as a home for destitute people. Here the state provided shelter, food, and basic medical care for people who had no other means of support. From 1891 until 1933, the Newcastle County Hospital Cemetery was the burial grounds for people who died in the hospital. It also served as the county cemetery, the potter's field for coroner's cases, unidentified dead, and the indigent of Newcastle County, those who died without family or means for a proper burial. There were more than 2,300 burials from 1891 to 1933 in this cemetery. The cemetery closed when the Newcastle County Hospital was closed in the fall of 1933, and the hospital itself was destroyed by fire in 1966. When plans were being developed for I-95 construction, the cemetery lay in the path of the proposed FAI-1 interchange. This would be the I-295 interchange, which connects I-95 and the Delaware Memorial Bridge. The Highway Department placed a notice in the newspaper announcing their plans. They requested that any family members who wanted a body reinterred should contact them. They did not receive any responses, but this isn't surprising since people were buried in the cemetery because family could not be located at the time of their death. Since there were no responses, the Highway Department proceeded with construction as planned. About 80% of the cemetery was covered with a 20-foot embankment and then topped off with asphalt. Here's another view. And you can see Route 13 sort of running from southeast to northwest. And you can see the Almshouse on the right, and then the area of the remaining graves. A 1958 Wilmington Morning News article said that the State Highway Department does not intend to be ruthless about the old Potter's Field, and that they would erect a marker describing the Potter's Field and the number of people buried there. However, no marker was ever installed. For nearly 50 years, the cemetery was neglected and nearly forgotten. Over time, construction debris and trash were dumped there. Trees, bushes, and vines grew. They entangled each other and they covered over the graves not covered by the interstate. The only hint of the cemetery's existence was an exterior chain link fence along Baylor Boulevard. An interior fence has long since rusted and fallen upon itself. Several years ago, an access road was built between the remaining grave markers and the I-295 connector. The access road construction created a large berm along the cemetery side. The berm is now home to several families of burrowing animals. The photo on the left is of one such burrow. This is probably a groundhog burrow. But if you squat down and peek inside, like the picture on the right, you can see the edge of a marker is clearly visible. So this berm covered over a number of graves. The cemetery is stark, even a bit desolate. Tree stumps interrupt the remaining rows of numbered markers. Some markers are toppled over. Several are out of numerical sequence. The atmosphere is anything but peaceful and serene. There's a constant roar of trucks, cars, and motorcycles, occasionally punctuated by sirens. DelDOT traffic counts state that in 2021, an average of 95,000 vehicles pass over this interchange every single day. Farnhurst Potter's Field is more than a cemetery. The land that it occupies has a very long history that stretches back thousands of years. It's a storied place. It sits along what used to be a large bend in the Christina River. You can see the large bend there. The Christina is a tidal floodplain river. Its marshes can be easily seen on this 1948 map. For centuries, it connected the Lenape and the Minqua people in Susquehanna River to the west. The Christina River surroundings were Lenape hunting and fishing grounds. After the Lenape people were removed, much of the surrounding area was converted to farmland. In the 1800s, the land was owned and farmed by George McCrone, holder of and trader in enslaved people. This area on some early maps is called McCrone Swamp. This property is also along the migratory path for birds, monarch butterflies, and the American shad. It's a storied place. In 1961, before construction began on 95, it was decided that this bend in the Christina River presented a expensive obstacle to road construction. So the river was diverted and that large loop in the river was filled in. The ambivalence or even disregard for those buried in the Farnhurst Potter's Field was mirrored by a disregard for the historic and environmental value of the Christina River and its surroundings. Like many other Delaware rivers, the Christina has a legacy of environmental disruption and dumping of sewage, trash, and chemical waste. To understand part of the transformation of this piece of land from wetland to interstate, I looked at herbarium records. The time period was 1885 to 1965. The plant specimen collectors were pioneers of Delaware flora records: Edward and Robert Tatnall, Albert Commons, William Canby. The Mid-Atlantic Herbarium Consortium currently holds 70 records with Farnhurst locality. The majority of these are native plants. Many are bog plants, those that survive in wet habitats. A number of plant species in these records are now listed as historic or of conservation concern. Also gone are the abundant beaver, quail, shad, and other wildlife that lived in the Christina River and its wetlands. Fortunately, today we have a much better understanding of the ecological value of wetlands and the rich biodiversity they support. But we have to live with history's legacy when these areas were drained, polluted, and left as environmental wastelands. As part of plans for I-295 improvements, an archaeological investigation was conducted in 2007. As this slide shows, this is a quote from the report, there's a low potential for any intact prehistoric archaeological remains from any time period. So also gone with the native plants and wildlife are historic or archaeological remains from the people who lived and traveled there for thousands of years. Although humble, these graves must be honored. Honoring them is our community's recognition of and respect for our common humanity. The land where their remains rest, a former wetland also used by Native Americans, represents our common heritage and our common connection to and dependence upon the earth. Cemeteries are for the living, not just for the dead. The seeds, as is so wonderfully expressed in this Mexican proverb, the seeds are a cemetery restoration project. These seeds are planted for those who have no voice or whose voice has been muted or not been heard. They're seeds for advocacy today to demand dignity for each person. These seeds cannot restore the wetland, but they can sow awareness of its history and importance to the environmental health of our state and its people. This is a very simple concept map of the plans for restoration or renovation of the Farnhurst Potter's Field. Three main areas of activity are to respect this area as a sacred ground, environmental mitigation, and to use the place, its history, and its legacy to advocate for the living. So we'll look a little bit at these three areas of renovation. The first, respecting it as a sacred ground. Dumpsters were needed to remove the trash that had been dumped there over the past 50 years. Refrigerators, car seats, water heaters, pipes, rugs, mattresses, bathroom fixtures, and more were removed. DHSS hired a tree crew to clear the area of most of the large trees and shrubs. This enabled the remaining markers, those not buried by the highway, to be visible. An historic marker was dedicated on November 1st, 2020. The ceremony included honoring the Civil War and Spanish-American War veterans buried here. Today, a bench provides a place to sit and reflect. The next area of renovation, environmental mitigation. Several dump trucks full of invasive shrubs, vines, and weeds were removed. We received a mini grant from the Delaware Invasive Species Council to help with clearing invasive plants and planting native plants. Most death records for this cemetery were lost, all except one death record book. Two dedicated volunteers, Hal Brown and Kathy Detweiler, have been reconstructing the list of those buried from death certificates. To date, about 2,150 death certificates of the more than 2,300 burials have now been found, and the information is being entered into Find a Grave. And this is an excellent resource for people who are conducting genealogy or trying to locate a relative. These death certificates have information that helps us to understand and learn more about those buried in this cemetery. Most fall into two categories: stillborn, premature babies and infants, one category. The other category, single and primarily African-American men. Many graves contain more than one person. Unlike other cemeteries of this era, which were segregated by race, some graves here hold both Black and white burials. The causes of death are varied: stillbirth, prematurity, and failure to thrive for the infants. For adults, many died during the 1918 influenza outbreak. Others were taken by diseases such as cholera, typhoid, and cancer. Several people were killed by accident. The cause of death for still many others was senile dementia. Some struggled with substance abuse disorder, as the stated cause of death was acute alcoholism or opium overdose. When an occupation was listed on the certificate of death, common entries were laborers, farm workers, and housekeepers. You might say that they were the essential workers of their time. Number were immigrants born in Europe, Italy, Germany, Russia, Ireland. Like generations of immigrants before them and generations to follow, they likely came to America seeking freedom and a better life. Using these certificates of death, profiles are being created by Kathy Detweiler in a part of the Farnhurst.com website called Profiles in Obscurity. And she's using online genealogical research such as Ancestry.com, Family Search, and newspaper articles to develop stories about these individuals and to make them be real even in history. Farnhurst Potter's Field reminds us that our care for the living and the dead must include respect for the dead. And it must also include the stranger, the forgotten, the poor, and the indigent. Cemeteries hold our story. They honor our common humanity and connections to the lives, triumphs, and struggles of those who came before us. We have to carry this connection on and be advocates. Tell the cemetery story to people alive today and document it for the future. this is some of the ways that we are doing this. Michael mentioned, in a great segue, the tunnel project, which we call Souls Under the Highway. And this is a tunnel adjacent to the cemetery and the Markell Trail. And Michael has developed a wonderful vision of what it might look like to tell the history of the cemetery, the people buried there, and the storied place that it is in Mosaic. I'd like to conclude by thanking the many people who have helped to make this project possible, to keep this project moving along. And I will close now and save any questions for the end. Thank you. Okay, next up is RuthAnn, talking about the Fork Branch Cemetery in Cheswold. RuthAnn Purchase James is the linguist turned sociologist of Lenape Welsh descent. Her greatest honor is working towards Lenape language restoration and restoring the dignity of her mother's people. And she is a water protector immersed in the Unami dialect of the Lenape language. Thank you, RuthAnn.
Wanishi Wemi, Faith Kuehn, Anna Wick, Sakima Apsuquenamunk, Nkwimi Teminket. I am saying thank you to Faith and Anna in the ancient language of Lenape, which has been spoken on this continent for probably 20,000 years or so. Some form of it anyway. And I also want to thank William Penn, because he's teaching us to live together well with all living things. He actually spoke the Lenape language. They say he kind of spoke baby talk, but so do I probably. I'd like to thank Emmanuel Union Church, who has stewarded this cemetery and the one across the street and another one for, I guess, 100 and some years. And before that, it was Manship Cemetery and Little Union that were stewarding, the churches that were stewarding these properties that we're now attempting to put into a land trust. So my story is very different from Faith's story she just shared, and yet I feel a lot of connection, and I wonder if some of the people who went to that institution Faith just told us about were there because they were crazy enough to intermarry outside their ethnic group. And so I imagine there are some relatives of this community there. It would be good for us to do some research about that and just dive right into it. So I'm going to dive right into this presentation and say that I started doing cemetery care because I saw elders in the cemetery who needed help, and I just couldn't walk away while they were like struggling even to get the weed whacker out of the back of the car. These kind of cemeteries that I'm taking care of don't have a fund of any kind. Church members go around to all the relatives once a year and ask for a donation, and then they bring it in on Trustee Sunday. And Richard Durham is a trustee at Emmanuel Union who's been teaching me a lot, and JT Johnson is also an apprentice to him. I don't know how he learned all this, but he's like an encyclopedia. And so just helping the elders and learning to honor their stories made me very curious, and I learned about cultural mapping as an actual like discipline. And I started cultural mapping around this cemetery and in the cemetery, and found that this cemetery at the village of Fork Branch boasts the earliest documentation of the intermarriage of the 3 Delaware Bay tribes. So that's a common ground, and it could help us come together. And it does. I mean, all 3 tribes are always represented at every funeral, so they're all related. We know that. And if they're not directly related, they're married in, and just such a huge extended family. And it's such a miracle that there's such a high Native American per capita in the Lenape Federal Census District. It's actually the highest Native Americans per capita of any federal census district off the reservation in all of North America from the 2010 census. I haven't heard that from the 2016, which was a little wonky, but we don't have to go there. So let's have the next slide. And the organization that I started to develop the land trust is called Green Bridge. Could green bridge the gap between red and blue? And at Greenbridge CDC, we're starting to get grants through Healthy Communities Delaware, partnership with the Delaware Estuary, Delaware Humanities, and other funders. And we have a connection to the Experimental Farm Network. And so we started doing our cultural mapping work right here. And you can see that there are remnants of the ancient belief systems still alive in the community. For instance, the flat white cedar is marking the 4 corners of the family plot right there. And the flat white cedar is the traditional sacred cleansing of the Lenape. And most of the northeastern woodland preferred white. The flat white cedar is gentler, you know. The red one is picky, prickly. And we also consider the markers, the gravestones, as monuments to our ancestors. And although they're very disadvantaged community that actually wasn't allowed to exist as a Native American tribe, Native Americans were shipped out or other things. So there were no Native Americans existing in the state of Delaware according to the records, but they did create an ethnic designation at some point, which I haven't totally pinned down yet, but the government gave an ethnic designation of Delaware Moor, and that's probably related to the fact that the Swedes and the Finns from Morton, Finland, farmed with a lot of Lenape, and that's why Cheswold's original name was Morton, Moorton, and the main drag is Morton along the railroad track. So the Delaware Moors were probably on the Morton farms, and John Morton was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So there's a lot of connection to the Finnish people probably, and a lot of high blood quantum of Scandinavian blood in this particular people group. The other living monument, I'm showing you Benjamin Durham here. Samuel Durham here. I'm sorry, one more time. This is Samuel Loatman from Woodland Beach. And you can see the map behind him. His land markers, the marker on the corner of his property, was one of the first documented places where a Native American was allowed to own land. And that was found in reports about a huge hurricane that happened in the 1800s, and they claimed that he was the son of the owner of Woodland Beach. So that's a pretty cool factoid. Can you change the slide now? We have winter tour students who come down and help us, and Anna Wick's landscape architecture students come down and help us, and McKay Jenkins environmental journalism students and John Cox's interdisciplinary design students. All kinds of people have been coming down to help us here as we learn to live together while we created this Lenape Forest Garden on the edge of the cemetery. So, you know, from cemetery care, you have to take care of the hedgerows. The hedgerows were full of brambles and graves were even hidden in them. And we had to take back more than 10 feet on either side, on one side and the back. But then across the road at the older cemetery, we could take back a lot of that, those brambles and whatnot, but we uncovered an illegal dump. So it took us a couple years and we had lots of volunteers. These volunteers are from the John Hines Wildlife Refuge, and they're training in environmental stewardship as high school students. And the others are from, I know there's somebody here from National Parks. There's somebody here, oh, Jim Shanahan from the Shad Fest people. And, oh, a high school environmental club from Appaquinimink is in this picture. And this picture headed up an article that got posted in the employees newsletter for the National Park System. So we started to get quite a bit of interest. Okay, you can change the slide there, but we have a website called lult.org, and you can see all kinds of articles about different projects that we've been doing, because as we got into the hedgerow, we learned that we needed to take out the invasives, learn to plant the natives, and then collaborate with a lot of different people to learn how to steward the freshwater wooded wetlands that surround that little peninsula called Fork Branch. And so that led us into citizen science. We have a tribal citizen science program with the tribe, and then the cemetery care project with the church, and the cultural mapping is being uploaded to an interactive map where you'll be able to click on the headstone and up pops a story of that ancestor, hopefully recorded by one of their direct descendants, and then a link to maybe one of their hobbies or some research project we've done. For instance, Anna, they call her Belly, Annabelle. Her nickname is Belly, but she's in the polka dotted dress down here next to Upsuquanamunk, that's Chief White Otter, and some direct descendants of Clem Carney. Now, Clem Carney is here with the pipe in his mouth. He was one of the few people that would talk to the anthropologists when they came down in the 1930s. And so Wes Lager interviewed him and thought he was a great storyteller and put a bunch of his artwork and his tools, handmade fishing net repair tools and making tools and fishing tools. And I don't know if he bought them or not. We never found out, but he took a bunch of them somewhere. And we asked Annabelle when she came down from Winterthur's preservation and conservation program, she said, what does the community really want? I want to research something they're asking for. So we said, why not help us find Clem Carney's tools and nets? And because one of his direct descendants actually asked me that question, where's Uncle Clem's stuff? So we went searching for it, and it was really fun, and she got a lot of really great raving reports in the field that she's in. And she got to make some national presentations because she developed workshops for us about fiber arts. So then we wanted to learn how to make those nets with those tools. And so his story is going to be one of the stories when you click on his headstone. This report she's done in a very creative way, and a link to the workshop will be present for all his descendants. And just curious people who want to learn more about the Carney family. You know, they're rather famous in Delaware right now. Some branches are anyway. Having said that, we do have to ask about dignity issues and the analysis of our work. And the grant I'm working with right now with Healthy Communities Delaware is for leadership development, partnership development, and helping us understand community engagement. When people came down in the 30s and 40s and said this is a Native American town, they didn't have a lot of time to spend there, and the only person who would talk to them was like the town drunk, and so he was not respected by the local people. And yet you know, good-hearted people don't know that. I could tell you some terrible stories about Clem Carney. I've been listening to a lot of them, but he's hilarious and awful. So when some very good-hearted people came down from Cheney University to do a mural with the community to get more community engagement, they put Clem Carney up in the clouds. I don't know if you can see him on the left of that mural. And it was so upsetting to the local people. They were like, oh, that's awful. He's not like a saint up in heaven. But the people who did the mural didn't know he was like a bad guy that was the only one who talked to the academics. But we've come a long way, and Annabelle has helped us so much. The one other thing I wanted to say was that we have some new books being written. I'm sure we're going to have one about Fork Branch and the Delaware, you know, the mystery of the Moors. But right here we have a book on the right called Remembrance of a Forgotten Folk. And this is written by a person who came to Fork Branch Cemetery and asked all kinds of questions. You know, I put my number on the Google map. That's the only way I got found. And she told me that the same names are in her cemetery, that we must be connected. So she started doing genealogy, and that's actually how she found us, by doing her genealogy. And then she said, you need to learn about our cemetery. She's in London, Ontario, Canada, and her people came through that Gnadenhutten massacre in Oklahoma. They were, Ohio. There was a massacre up there, and only a few people weren't there that day, and they scooted up above the Canadian border and started the Moravian, Ontario, Canada, and the Moravian town and Muncie reservations. Okay, we can change the page again. I could tell you so many stories about this. So if you get this presentation, you'll be able to click on cultural mapping right there that's underlined, and heritage stewardship and civics education. You'll see lots of articles, fascinating stuff, good stuff for your young people to get involved in, because we have a lot of apprenticeships. We try to put people together. But this one in the center I want to talk about real quickly. Every Memorial Sunday, we have a celebration of the ancestors. We remember we celebrate the ancestors, we remember the veterans, and we thank the youth. So every Memorial Sunday, we pick another one from those three categories. And this is a little, the front of our program from this past Memorial Sunday. On the right, Chief Quiet Thunder passed away recently, but he was very much in support of our Lenape Forest Gardeners training. So now we're getting funded to create a sustainable land management and water stewardship training program that will complement the land trust. And of course, we'll practice first on the cemeteries, make sure our hedgerows are healthy and complementary to Mother Earth's resilient plan for us. And then the half acre that the tribe currently owns, which is right beside that, and that has turned into a storytelling circle with a freshwater mussel restoration project. And then the schoolyard, which was turned into a state police firing range, still hasn't been returned to us. And it's contaminated, of course, and has a big, ugly, rusty fence around it. But some people are working on that. And then the Conservation Fund just helped the open space people from the state buy 11 acres to complement all this. So it's all contiguous now. And half of those 11 acres are marsh, but that's okay. It's really special marsh. And it has ancient archaeological sites in it, according to Ned Height. So let's change the page before I tell you any more stories on that page. I want to thank some really special people. The Board of Greenbridge CDC, the Council of the Lenape Indian Tribe of Delaware, our Lenape Union Land Trust, which is just starting. We don't even really have our act together, but we have to have it. As the United Methodist Church changes, we have to put the cemeteries in a land trust right away. And then the Healthy Communities Delaware, the Emmanuel Union Church down there in the center, right in Cheswold, the backbone of the community, and the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, University of Delaware, Delaware Humanities. So many people I have to thank. And I could go on and on, as you can imagine, But I'll stop there and just thank you for this opportunity. Nulamitawa nana kakwalan kuntuwakan kenemakewa kikeyu. Thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you, RuthAnn, very much. And now we have a little time at the end of all this. If there are, we didn't have too many questions in the Q&A. At the very beginning, there was a question for Regina for her website, so maybe put that in the chat again. The speakers could unmute and put on their videos. And I'll ask if, first of all, I'll ask of the panel members if everybody hearing each other's presentations, if there was a question that you had for another presenter or something you would like to comment on. Maybe we can start with Gloria.
I thought the presentations were fascinating. Sometimes I'm siloed at the plantation, and so I'm so involved in my own work. I'm just amazed at all the incredible work everyone has done across the state of Delaware.
Thank you, thank you, Gloria. It's it is really fascinating to see how much history is wrapped up in cemeteries. It's not something I might have thought about 15 years ago, but it is really true. Regina, if you're there, are there any thoughts you had or comments you wanted to make before we ask a few other questions?
I think everyone involved appreciates how much patience this takes to get any work done, and the amount of detail work that's involved is incredible.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, you and Kathy Detweiler know that pouring through certificates of death, just going through so many, trying to look for the ones that you want. And as a matter of fact, we had, of the more than 2,300 people buried there, we had the total up to, I don't know, 12 or 1,300, and then suddenly realized that, oh, there was another descriptor of the cemetery. It was the county cemetery. As Regina mentioned, a lot of these cemeteries don't just have one name, and they might have one name when they started and then another name and another name. And so depending on what the coroner or the medical examiner puts on the certificate of death, you may have a whole nother avenue to explore for potential burials there. Thank you, Regina. Michael?
Yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for the diligent work they're doing. You know, it's so important to be able to, you know, tell these stories and to really build coalitions. It's all off the strength of your work, and through these projects, you know, I feel like we've really gotten to really, you know, understand just like, you know, just how slow, just how painful, just how methodical it can be. But these discoveries are so important, and I'm just really grateful to be a part of the project. And thank you, Faith, for your leadership there. I really feel like, you know, our emerging kind of peer advocates within the behavioral health system, it's just the cemetery projects are going to be a place where we're going to constantly be able to invite people into community and to tell our stories and to continue to work for a more connected and healthier community. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Ruth, you were the last up, but did you want to say just a few things before I ask a couple other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to everybody, I was super inspired by your presentations, and I feel like each of us is like honing in on kind of a specialty that supports these cemetery projects. And and we could, you know, share some of that specialization, you know. And one of the things I'm really hoping to do more of is incorporate more of the arts, Michael. But I'm also struggling in certain settings where there's a lot of like kind of the divide and conquer mentality prevents the local direct descendants of our cemetery from working together well. So those kind of dialogues about how to help people work together well and build community around these projects of restoring dignity is very present also on the plantation and of course in all cemeteries. Lastly, I really want to learn more about facilitating community engagement. Like we have some student interns doing presentations on November 4th, and we haven't had as much community engagement as we'd like to. It feels like we have a lack of integrity if we don't have the direct descendants working alongside the students. And you know, we can boast, but it's not enough. I'm not going to be satisfied until we have more community engagement. So if anybody has suggestions on that, and you know, just keep encouraging each other. I'd love to get together again soon with each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, RuthAnn. I wanted to mention one thing in terms of engagement. There's an organization called the Association for Gravestone Studies, and they're really quite impressive in the amount of research and breadth of what they cover, just all kinds of different architecture of graveyards and cemeteries and burial grounds, certainly going through chronological time and how styles change, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been having some interesting conversations with a few of the officers there, saying, and I will say that they have in their annual meeting, they have had special sessions on African-American cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries, other religions. So that is all very interesting. But what the conversation I've been having with them is, suppose the gravestone is, there may not even be a stone. And if there is a stone, it just might be a numbered marker. And so how do we interpret that? How do we, if you look at a monument, many of them are built to be impressive. But if there is no marker, or if there's only a numbered marker, how can we interpret that so that we can really engage the community? And I think one way we can do it is a way that we're all trying, is by telling the story of the people and the times that they lived in. And that's what's going to connect these burial grounds to people and make them see their value. So that's kind of on the question of, or the subject of interpretation. How do you think that we can continue to improve our interpretation and our engagement with the community with these burial grounds when there isn't something physical or noticeable like a monument that would immediately engage somebody? And again, I'll kind of go around and I'll start with Gloria.
So we do have that issue. There are no headstones right now. It's a field. So when we go out there, we do have markers that identify the perimeter of the field. So I think part of it is the visitations that we have, where we have the PowerPoint, we explain to people, when we offer those visitations to the public throughout the year. And you do have to explain the history. You do have to explain the people and tell the stories and share the stories, and also be open for the public to offer their advice and their information and their histories. So overall, it's a time consuming. It's going to take a lot of time to do it. But I think from what I've seen today, most of us are extremely dedicated to doing this and are willing to do this, even if it takes years. There's no easy solution, but I think the commitment that we all have is saying a lot, and will say a lot to the public.
Yes, thank you, Gloria. It's true. It's a job that I tell people that sometimes you choose something and sometimes something chooses you, and that's certainly the way I feel about this project. And I think I think all these cemeteries have chosen well in terms of the people that are working so hard to keep them in mind. Regina, you do have some monuments at Mount Olive, and of course some of the other cemeteries that you mentioned were buried, but do you have any thoughts on interpretation or engagement, how to engage the public in understanding the historical value and importance of these cemeteries?
I think it's all been indirect. On my website, I offer that if you want some genealogy help with any of these people, contact me. That's my email. And that has gotten a lot of engagement. But also there has been engagement from the Delaware Underground Railroad. We have conductors buried there. There's been engagement from USCT interests. So each person whose story I can offer reaches out to a different group of people. Everybody there is important. Everybody matters or nobody matters. But it becomes an individual connection for the people with the person or the story they see on the website.
Right, and that's why genealogy is so important. Just a quick sidebar, in researching the people buried at Farnhurst Potter's Field, Kathy Detweiler located the grand nephew of someone who's buried there, and he lives in Smyrna. And she contacted him, and turns out he is very actively involved in the renovation of the Union Cemetery in Smyrna. And there's a group of men from the Prince Hall Masons there who are doing that. And we were so fascinated to see that there's a tombstone of a Charles Terry, the Buffalo Soldier. And so it just opened up, a whole nother aspect of history, and right there in Smyrna. And again, it was a cemetery that was overgrown and overlooked, but now the Masons are doing a great job trying to keep it maintained and trying to raise its awareness.
Yeah, we have a number of the Prince Hall Mason founders in Mount Olive. Now they were moved from St. Peter's, obviously, because they died early enough to have been buried at St. Peter's, but their tombstones happen to survive the move. So you can actually see the Masonic symbols, and one of them even has an inscription that he was a master of the lodge. So each group is represented somehow.
Mm-hmm. Michael, thoughts from you about interpretation or expanding the sort of the network of people?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to see that the Jack Markell Bike Trail and Newcastle County are going to be facilitating a call for public art along the entire trail. And thinking about the tunnel that's going through 295, I'm reminded of a pre-pandemic trip to Montreal. And Montreal, throughout the city, they have a series of projections. As soon as it gets dark, you can stand in various areas of the city and through these projections learn of the history. And so I'm really just excited to see how perhaps projection, new media, video, audio can really serve the purpose of capturing these stories and continuing to build a coalition of people who are interested in and learning more about these histories, learning more about these lives, and inviting people into the work of restoring and helping us think about how we would commemorate them. I think that what's been fascinating for me thinking about the Tunnel Project are all the various coalitions that I wouldn't normally think of that have really kind of come into the fold through Delaware Greenways, the biking community. These are, I'm often a critic of our state mental health system that, almost insist on staying siloed. And it's like, we need to break out and to expand our community and increase participation of our folks in all sectors. And I've just been, my heart has really been warmed by the people who are kind of brought in by this story. And, I love what you said too about, sometimes these things, they choose us. And I feel like, over the years, particularly with our couple failures here on that project, there's times where the project has felt like the bane of my existence. And at the same token, I feel like it has really helped us see the real purpose and importance of carrying through and seeing it through to completion, just because this is so naturally an extension of the advocacy that we're already doing for our friends within the system now. This history, we often talk about in recovery and recovering from post-traumatic stress. We need to be able to close these stress response loops, and being able to tell these stories, I feel like, is really, really critical of closing these stress loops, of completing that loop, and just the importance of storytelling in general. Simply hearing a story from beginning, middle to end is in itself healing. And so, again, I'm really looking forward to the expanded coalition here. Also, really looking forward to learning from everybody's niche projects, because, again, speaking of coalition building, here we are. And I think being able to, stitch together our resources and continuing to advocate, we can continue to turn over every stone and find those dollars. And then too, to get creative with it. That's where I feel like, us being able to put an arts and community arts lens over top of this problem, again, has been a way for us to not only expand the coalition, but, our funding is so deeply segregated in this country. And so being able to tap in and extend through various, pots of funding, this work is just so critical, and I think it touches on so many different things that I'm really looking forward to seeing, where we are down the road.
Thank you, Michael. And I was very happy to see that tomorrow is a whole session on historic preservation funding opportunities. So maybe we'll find some money stones there, Michael.
Hope so.
So just before we're about to wrap up here in the next minute, RuthAnn, anything you want to say in a half a minute or so?
I would like to congratulate all the partnerships that have already formed around these places. We really are doing some beautiful things together, even though I'm eager for more and better. I also really honor the idea that Preservation Delaware is thinking about living history. We live with our history, and this is one of those places that it's perfect to have that dialogue. Thank you.
That was a great wrap up, RuthAnn, and I just want to thank Preservation Delaware for allowing us to present this panel, to tell our stories, and and again, the many sponsors who've helped to make this possible. And especially thank Alex and the other preservation people for helping us work through the all of the wonders of Zoom. And so there's a lot more on the program, and I know this is the sort of the lunch break. And thank you so much. I'm just so appreciative, and hopefully this meeting will allow us to keep expanding our network. So enjoy this beautiful autumn day, and thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, Faith, so much. And thank you to the rest of the presenters. It's an honor to have you all here with us and to share your experiences and the work that you're doing. So we're just really excited that we could help make that happen. So yes, as Faith said, take a little lunch break now. I'm going to grab some lunch myself, but I hope to see you all back at 1 p.m. for our next presentation. So thanks again. We'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.